Hey everyone, and welcome. So today, we're going to dive into something really fascinating from an ancient text that's, well, surprisingly modern. We're looking at chapter 16 of the Bhagavad Gita, but not just as a religious text. We're treating it like an ancient blueprint, a kind of psychological operating system for human nature itself.
So let's just jump right in with a pretty bold question. Could the huge, messy, complicated spectrum of human nature actually be boiled down to just two basic categories? I mean, it sounds a little too simple, doesn't it?
Well, you might be surprised, but according to this ancient wisdom, the answer is a resounding yes. It suggests there's this fundamental split that really shapes our entire experience of life.
So in chapter 16, what we get is this incredible analysis of two psychological tendencies that exist inside all of us. It calls them the divine, or Davi, and the demonic, or Asuri. Now, it's super important to think of these less as, angels and demons, and more like two different software programs that can run on the human mind.
And as you can probably guess, these two operating systems lead you to totally different places. The divine path, it says, leads you toward liberation and real inner freedom. The demonic path, that one inevitably ends in bondage and a whole lot of suffering. So you've got one path leading to freedom and the other to suffering. Let's really dig into what makes them so different.
All right, so let's kick things off with the divine nature. The Gita lays out some really specific qualities that make up this path to liberation, and it all starts from the inside.
So, a person on this path, they're described as being fearless, not because they're reckless, but because they get what's truly real and what's not. They have a real purity of heart, no envy, no malice clouding things up. Everything about them, their mind, their words, their actions, is just simple and direct. No games, no hidden agendas. And when you have that solid inner foundation, it naturally flows into things like nonviolence, truthfulness, and, get this, an almost total absence of anger.
And that inner state? It doesn't just stay inside, it has to come out, right? You see it in their actions. It shows up as selfless giving, as real control over the senses, not suppression, but mastery. It's in their commitment to learning and study, their ability to genuinely forgive, their strength when things get tough, and, maybe most importantly, a deep, genuine compassion for every living thing.
So, what happens when you put all of that together? Well, the result is a person who's just fundamentally balanced. They're not being yanked around by every little worldly desire, and because of that, their actions are naturally aimed at making the world a better place for everyone.
Okay, now for the flip side. Let's dive into the total opposite. The demonic nature. This is the blueprint for a life that, as the Gita puts it, is a direct path to bondage and suffering.
This nature is built on hypocrisy. That gap between who you pretend to be and who you really are. It's just dripping with arrogance, that pride that comes from money or status. And then there's this excessive pride, where you're demanding respect you haven't even earned. And what happens when those desires get blocked? Bam! It explodes into anger and just plain harshness. But really, at the very bottom of it all is ignorance, a total inability to see the difference between what helps and what hurts.
The Gita actually sums up the entire philosophy of this mindset in one really stark quote. It's a worldview that basically says, this whole world, it's meaningless, it's an illusion, there's no God, it's all just driven by lust and desire. What else could there possibly be?
And that kind of worldview, man, it has some serious psychological fallout. I mean, if satisfying your own desires is the only thing that matters, you get trapped in this endless cycle of wanting more and more. You'll do anything to get wealthy. And pretty soon, you start to believe that I am the absolute center of the universe. It's all I am the Lord, I am powerful, I am happy. But the Gita is pretty clear. This way of thinking is a direct recipe for a life filled with anxiety, conflict, and just misery.
So you have to wonder, where does this whole destructive mindset even come from? Well, the Gita doesn't just list off the symptoms, it gets right to the root cause, and it describes it as three specific gateways to self-destruction.
And it all comes down to a simple number: 3.
They're called the triple gates to hell. And look, that's a pretty dramatic name, but it's meant to show just how powerful these forces are in destroying your own inner peace and your potential for growth.
So what are they? Lust, anger, and greed. But here's the crucial part. They feed each other in this vicious cycle. It all starts with lust, or kama, that constant burning desire for more pleasure, more stuff. Now, when that desire gets blocked, what happens? It instantly flips into anger, or krodha. But what if you get what you wanted?
Does it lead to peace? Nope. It just morphs into greed, or lobha, this gnawing need to get and hold on to even more. This cycle, right here, this is the engine that powers the whole demonic nature.
Okay, so we've got these two totally different paths laid out in front of us. One leads to freedom, one leads to a cage. So how on earth are you supposed to choose? How do you navigate? Well, luckily, the Gita gives us a very clear compass.
And it starts with a pretty big warning. It talks about the person who just throws wisdom out the window and acts on every single whim. For that person, the outcome is pretty bleak. The text says they won't find any real fulfillment, no perfection in what they do, they won't find lasting happiness, and they certainly won't reach any kind of higher purpose or destination. Basically, just following your impulses, it's a dead end.
So if just do it isn't the answer, what is? The Gita points to something it calls scripture, or shastra. Now, when you hear scripture, don't just think of one specific holy book. In this context, it really means a whole body of time-tested wisdom, a framework that helps you figure out what's right and what's wrong, and what your unique duty, your dharma, actually is.
And this leads to the ultimate conclusion of the chapter. Let this collected wisdom be your guide, your authority, for deciding what you should and shouldn't do. Instead of just surfing the waves of your feelings and impulses, the idea is to align your actions with a framework for living that's proven to work.
And that brings us to a really powerful question, especially for us today. In our modern world where we're constantly told to follow your passion or just do what feels good, what serves as your scripture? What's the code, the set of principles, the body of wisdom that you turn to as your ultimate authority to guide your choices? That's a big one to think about.